Welcome to Spotlight Television. I'm Damon Roberts. Vichy Partners is a boutique consulting firm with a big reputation of helping companies improve their revenues and decrease their costs significantly. Vichy Partners started in 2008 and has been shaking up the industry by dramatically growing earnings for their powerful clients. Over many years, Vichy has been solving the language and tools of empowered change, creating a simpler and more productive way, effectively bringing management and employees together to accelerate change that can easily be measured in profitability. Their unique business model and very important mission solve tough problems, from transforming business models to coping with economic changes. When your supply chain is choking and you need to transform, but you don't know who to call, well, my next guest may be that person. You're going to call this guy, Alec Hudnut, the managing partner of Vici Partners. I want to welcome him to Spotlight Television. Alec, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Damon. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you. Such an important topic. It's such an interesting time in what's going on in the country financially and in the economy. I want to get into all of that. But I guess first, tell me a little bit about you and tell me a little bit about Vici Partners.
So Vici Partners is, as you said, a boutique consulting firm, and we focus on earnings growth. And our clients are as small as 50 million in revenue to greater than 50 billion in revenue. And our consulting approach is different than most consulting firms. We believe that the answer to improving profitability already lies inside the company. So imagine in your career, in your life, and for all the listeners as well, when you were at work and things were going wrong, or just doing your normal job every day, if you had been the owner of that business, or if the owner of the business had sat down with you and said, what are 2 or 3 things that we can do better here, differently here, you would have had an opinion. You would have had an idea on how to make things more streamlined for the customer or get rid of unexpected delays, etc. And those ideas, which often start as complaints from employees, can turn into initiatives that can improve the efficiency of the business or improve the revenue of the business. So our consulting philosophy at Vici Partners is the answer lies within. And the reason that it hasn't been implemented yet is that the complaint or the idea hasn't been sufficiently quantified, right? What's the benefit of doing this? And what are the barriers to getting it done? Who are the people inside of the organization who have been blocking this idea? And so we work on both quantifying the initiative and breaking down the blockers, and also then helping the company to implement the initiative that was sourced from within. And when you do it that way, when the company is coming up with the answers themselves, they're much more likely to get implemented, because it's not an outsider telling them what to do. It's an outsider facilitating the process to find what already lives inside of the company, and to bring it to light and to get it over the finish.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And you said in your statement there that you're working with companies. It seems like a very wide range. So let's talk a little bit about the companies you're working with. And to kind of your whole point there, who's deciding within the company that, hey, maybe it's time to reach out to somebody like you guys? Is it usually the CEO? Do you find that it's more of the whole company, like you said, maybe employees and management together are saying, hey, maybe we can take that next step by finding someone like you guys? Tell me about the companies you're working with, size, who they are, how you're finding them. And who's usually the person coming to you and saying, hey, we think you guys can help us?
So our customers are the CEO, and sometimes also the CFO, or if it's a private equity owned company, the owners. And typically we engage with companies when either it's a distressed situation where they need to get profitable quickly, they're running out of money, or they just want to be they want to be profitable. Many companies in America aren't profitable. If you sort the Fortune 500 list and take out all the ones that aren't profitable, it's dozens of companies. Why are they on the list? They're not profitable, right? Yeah. It's sort of like if you look at it with a different lens. So one category of customers are people who want to be profitable who are not. Most of our work, however, is with companies that are profitable, that want to grow revenue, but don't want to tap the equity markets or the debt markets to grow. So they work with us to improve their cash flows, and then they reinvest that in growth engines. Yeah. New products, new markets, acquisitions, etc.
Yeah. So when you talk about profitability, and I think this may be the most important question we talk about in here, and you think about what's going on right now in the economy with companies. You have a possible recession looming. You have supply chain prices obviously still increasing, supply chain problems. I mean, everybody's familiar with what a supply chain is now, where before, I don't think if you asked 10 people, 2 of them would have known what the supply chain is. Now everyone's familiar with it. So you have recession, you have obviously inflation still higher than obviously the Fed would like to see it. You've got money much more expensive, 500 basis points of federal interest rates raising in less than about 18, 19 months. To think about company and profitability, it is a very tough environment. So when you guys come in an environment like this, do you have the same approach? Do you have to change what you guys do? How do you look at profitability in this kind of environment?
Well, 3 to 4 years ago, in many industries, particularly tech, profitability wasn't important. It was about revenue growth at any price. And I remember talking with the CEO of a publicly traded tech company who I went to business school with a long time ago. And I said, we'd love to help you get profitable. And he said to me, we don't care about profits. We care about revenue growth. Well, today, 3 to 4 years later, it's all about profitability. Yeah. Because as you mentioned, Damon, it's more expensive to borrow debt. It's harder to tap the public markets. And therefore, the way to accumulate your cash reserves so that you can continue to grow is to be more profitable. And instead of being valued on a multiple of revenue, we're seeing now, especially in the tech sector and others, EBITDA multiples, EPS multiples now becoming more important. And that's the way it should be. I mean, people are in business to make money. If you're not making money, the business is subsidizing your customer. It's not yet a real business. Right. You got to be in the business of making money. And so at this particular point in time, with rising inflation, rising debt costs, harder to tap the equity markets, Vichy is very busy because we focus on one thing only at Vichy Partners, which is growing operating income at our clients.
So when you guys first go in, is there anything that you immediately look for to kind of give you maybe those red flags on how much you have to do? What are those first kind of either warning signs or first things that you go, wow, okay, we can really put some gasoline on this fire? What are those things you look for first?
We always look at sourcing and procurement. So what are they buying their goods and services for from their suppliers? Because we do a lot of work in sourcing and procurement, and we have a good database of what is the reasonable price to pay. So we always look at sourcing. Interestingly enough, in procurement and sourcing, while price is important, right? We want to make sure our clients aren't paying more than the market. What's more important is getting the client to redefine what they're sourcing. So remember working a long time ago at a big oil company, and they had very, very fancy pickup trucks that they used out in the field. Well, if you used, the slightly less fancy pickup truck, you could save $3,500 a truck, and they had 100 in the field, in this one oil field at the time. And so they could save a lot of money by really thinking about what they actually needed to buy. So in procurement and sourcing, helping the client figure out what they actually need to buy is as important as buying it for as low a price as possible. So that's one area we always find earnings growth opportunities. The other is in technology. It's almost as if the CIOs, CTOs, and the CFOs and CFOs speak a different language. And that the CEO, CFOs are sometimes a little bit hesitant about admitting that and asking the real questions that they want to ask. And so we often find large dollar IT projects that have been approved that go on longer than they should, cost more than they should, and at the end of the day, don't deliver the ROI that they were supposed to. And so one area that we almost always work in is helping the companies rethink how they spend money on IT and making sure that the investments are necessary and have a high ROI that is tracked. If somebody in the business unit is not signing up for a cost reduction because of the IT project or revenue growth and committing to a quota change, unless it's like a required regulatory issue, the IT project should not be done. And some of our clients, after working with us, have even gone to an extreme of saying, if it costs more than $50,000 and it has to do with tech, it has to be approved by the CEO. So there's sort of, overspending in that category. That doesn't mean that a lot of money doesn't need to be spent in technology, because it does, as the world is digitizing, as companies are getting more efficient, as automation is occurring. We want to make sure it's spent on the right projects that drive cost reduction or drive revenue growth. So those are two big areas, procurement and also IT, that we always find savings.
But I'm sure you must walk into companies, I would think, and see some of the way they're doing things, like you said, with the world and technology evolving. I'm sure you must walk into situations and go, wait, you guys are doing this with that still? You haven't, whether it's how they email or how they, I don't know. There's got to be something that you walk into these big corporations and say, man, I cannot believe you're spending that much money still on X. And do you have a lot of that too?
We do. At Vici Partners, we've served almost all industries and across all functional areas of companies. So we have a great playbook or repository of, for example, what to do on first call resolution in a call center, right? There are certain ways to do it. There are certain different models and they have certain benefits. And so if, for example, the client's not focusing on first call resolution, which means when you call American Express, they actually solve your problem in the first call, right? That's what great companies do. Makes the customer happy, and it costs less to service them because they're not passing the call on to somebody else. But many companies don't measure that first call resolution. And so if they're not, we'll come in and show them 3 or 4 different ways to do it and then co-create the solution with them. Our consulting model is always co-creating or taking the idea that the company has and quantifying it and then building buy-in for it. Because we find if it's the company's solution, they're much more likely to implement it. And the rub on consulting, which is valid, is that most consulting firms just walk away after their fancy presentation. Not Vici Partners. We stick around, we help the client implement the solutions, and we're only satisfied if they have improved operating income.
Yeah, and that's interesting because, like you said, the rub on that, and I think that goes with a lot of, when you put the word consulting on, a lot of people just have this generic look at what that is, whether it's personal consulting or obviously what you guys are doing in business consulting. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about some competition. I know some that I think you've spent some time at, and then really what does separate you from some of that other competition in this, I don't know, I don't want to call it a stigma, but like you said, kind of a rub on the industry of consulting. It's like, well, what does that mean? What is that umbrella? Which obviously you've defined what you guys are doing, but talk to me a little bit more about your competition in the space and what really is separating you from some of those other firms that I think you've spent some time at a couple of them, haven't you?
Absolutely. So we compete with the big firms like McKinsey, Bain, BCG, Accenture, et cetera, as well as also the turnaround firms like Alex Partners, Alvarez and Marcel. The big thing that's different about Vici versus them is we have an unleveraged consulting model, which is also the antithesis of the industry. So
explain what that means to somebody who's just hearing that for the first time.
So we have no junior people on our projects. There's no 28-year-old, top of the class Harvard Business School, young man on our projects.
Right.
Everybody is in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. They've run companies. They've been executives in companies. They've owned companies. Those are the consultants that we bring to clients. And the reason that's important is to vastly oversimplify consulting. It's a formula. Q times B equals V. The quality of the idea times the buy-in for the idea equals the value you're going to generate for the idea in implementation. Most consulting firms spend all their time on the Q.
The quality.
Here, we're really smart. Here's the business case. Here's what you should do. Here's what it's worth. Great. The 28-year-old right out of Harvard Business School can do that really well. But you got to get the B right, the buy-in. Who's resisted this idea in the past? Who has to implement it? Who's this idea going to affect negatively politically? And senior people are better able to suss that out and to help the idea navigate through that political minefield. And so we invest a lot in the B. In our process, we do a 6-month sprint where we're identifying all the initiatives, getting buy-in for them, and then getting a green light and building implementation plans for them. Half our time is spent on the buy-in and the consensus building. And people like you and me who've been in the industry a long time, we can do it better because we've been in all of those difficult political situations where it's hard to get things done. So one big difference is that our model spends a lot of time on the buy-in and the consensus building, because without good buy-in, the idea won't get implemented, or it will get implemented at a substantially lower value than it could be. So that's one big difference. A second from the larger consulting firms is much of our compensation is derived from the cash flow that our clients actually generate from the initiatives that we co-created. And so we tie a lot of our compensation to, did you actually get the 100 million you thought you were going to get? Right. And please pay us when you do.
Right.
That's
so
a very
realized against unrealized in some ways.
That's a big difference between, here's the fancy blue book that's 200 pages long that tells you exactly what you have to do in your oil refinery. Is that ever going to get implemented? What we do is we're implementing 36 detailed initiatives that the oil refinery manager signed off on, the engineers signed off on, the guy in maintenance who has to implement it signed off on, the guy in maintenance who came up with the idea, he got the approval from the CEO. Guess what? He is much more likely to implement that than if a third party told him what to do. Because he came up with it, he pitched it to the executives, he got the buy-in.
Yeah.
Now he wants to do it because part of his ego is tied to it, right?
Right. It's like skin in the game. What I'm hearing you say on a most simplistic level is everybody has to have skin in this game, whether it's like you said, everybody's skin in the game, top down, including you guys when you come in. Everybody has to be invested in the success, in that realized profit gain that we're providing, that value. It doesn't maximize itself unless everybody has skin in the game.
Yes, you hit it on the nail on the head. If people think of themselves as employees, companies don't work as well as they could. If employees think of themselves as owners, guess what? The company starts working a lot better. And our process at Vichy Partners is, we go out, say it's $1 billion revenue company, we'll source a couple thousand ideas, we'll boil them down into the several hundred that have a good business case, that have good buy-in, that could be relatively easily implemented. And now we have 200 people who came up with the ideas, who feel like owners, who are making a difference in the company, right? If you think about your job as a CEO, one of the most important things is to keep people excited about being there. People stay at work because they need the money, or they, are good at the job, but they also stay when they feel that they have voice in the outcome of the business. And our process at Vichy Partners helps those employees have voice because they're getting ideas greenlit by the CEO and CFO. And guess what? When the guy in the mailroom goes up the elevator with the CFO can turn to him and say, hey, you found me $8.5 million by us using FedEx less.
Yeah.
That is another reason people stay at work, when they can feel more like an owner.
I want to ask you about some examples that you can think of, some of employee ideas that you guys were helped facilitate and were big, huge successes. But speaking of the at work thing, in this environment today, we talked a little bit before about obviously the environment today. But one of the obviously big things is people at work, getting people back to the office. Are you finding in what you're doing now, in the last 6 months to a year, is that part of what you're dealing with, companies coming to you and saying, yeah, we've got a bunch of stuff we want to do with you, but one of the things is how do you help us get people back to the office? Are you seeing that kind of a problem?
I think some companies, especially in big metropolitan areas like New York, banks, et cetera, they want people back in the office. I think it's going to be very hard.
You do?
because I think what we've learned in the pandemic is that hybrid works. We, Vici Partners, did a turnaround of a distressed situation in the very beginning of the pandemic. I never met the CEO. I never met the CFO. I never met anybody at the company, and we turned the company around in 4 months. The technology, the video works. It works. And so I would imagine that the model would stay mostly hybrid in many industries so that people have less commutes. So they, in a sense, work less because they're not spending an hour on either end getting to work. Definitely some time at the company is important, right? That's how you get to know people. That's how you build a network. That's how you get things done. But I think most companies will stay hybrid. We have one client who had 24 different facilities in the US, and they shut 20 of them permanently. That means in those areas, they are not going back to making people come to work. Yeah. So I think the hybrid model is here to stay in many industries, not all, but many.
So let's go back to some examples that you can think back on, some employee ideas that you guys were able to help obviously put in place and that were obviously huge successes. What are some of the big ones you can think of?
Well, let's take that guy in the mailroom who's riding up the elevator with the CFO. That's actually a real example. So big insurance company. We were, as we do in all of our projects, brainstorming with, running hundreds of brainstorming sessions. And I happened to be at one in the mailroom in the corporate headquarters of this big insurance company. And one of the operators said, hey, we seem to be sending out a lot more mail than we used to a couple of years ago. And I said, well, how much more mail? He said, I don't know. But there are 33 mail centers like this one across the company. And maybe the other guys are sending out more mail too. I said, okay, let's go figure it out. So it took us about 6 weeks to get the data. That's the other problem. If you're inside of a company and you're a guy in the mailroom, you've got a good idea, but how do you get the data to actually make the case, right? So it took us about 6 weeks to figure out how much was being spent on mail across these 33 different mail centers, right? Because there's not like a mail budget for the insurance company.
Right.
It's in marketing, it's in operations, it's in HR, it's in legal. So just figuring out how much they spent on mail was hard enough. They spent $250 million on mail every year.
Wow.
This is in the age of the internet.
Yeah.
Right?
Going back to our previous question, that seems like a lot still.
Yeah. We're like, okay, this is a good opportunity. So when we work with clients, we try and go after the easiest things first to build sort of a track record of success so that the company is encouraged to do more on its own in the future. So in this $250 million of mail, we didn't go after all of it. We went after the $9.5 million of FedEx that they sent to themselves overnight priority delivery. And that was not easy because we found that 90% of the overnight FedEx came from the head of HR who wanted to make sure her new programs got to people and got to people at their homes so that they were more likely to open them. Mm-hmm. And the general counsel who wanted to make sure that any contractor, once they left within 48 hours, got all the paperwork they needed, and were able to turn in their phone and their badges, et cetera. So he was also FedExing to people's homes. The head of HR, the head of legal, they both had budgets for this. They were within budget, and they didn't want to change. They're happy doing it the way they're doing it.
Yeah.
So we had to sit down with the CFO and say, look, we think there's $9.5 million, maybe you get 7 or 8 of it. But if we created an online interactive program for the head of HR to better describe the new programs that she was offering and allow people to actually sign up online, then it's a lot cheaper and you're going to get greater enrollment. And similarly with the CFO, the reason he had that, the general counsel, the reason he was FedExing contractors at home is because he didn't have a reliable way to get them on the phone or get them via email before they took off. And so we said, what if we put process in place before they left, before they got their last check, that they had to turn all this stuff in instead of waiting 48 hours. Mr. CFO, do we have your permission and your backing to talk to the general counsel and to talk to the head of HR about that? Yeah, absolutely. I want the $8 million. So we went and talked to, the general counsel, HR. They weren't that excited about it, but they were willing to do pilots. So we tried out these new approaches. They seemed to work better. And voila, you have $8 million of annual benefit that came from the one almost random comment from the guy in the mailroom saying, we seem to be sending out a lot more mail than we used to, right? So that just kind of shows how actually difficult it can be to implement a logical, valuable initiative.
Or to find those kind of problems. The guy who's obviously living it every day brings it up. Guy sitting up in the office on the 12th floor has no idea what's going on down there.
And never asked him.
Right.
In large part because usually when asked, the employees phrase it as a complaint, and I've been a CEO several times. After a while, it's just kind of like too much noise, right? Yeah. But if you generate 3,000 complaints, 300 of them are going to turn into good initiatives, and those good initiatives can help drive your earnings. And now, in the guy in the mailroom, when he rides up in the elevator with the CFO, they know each other.
Right.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for that $8 million idea. You got any other ones?
Yeah.
Now
Notice anything else?
Yeah. Now people are coming to work for another reason, not just the money, not just because they're good at their job or their
sense
job
of
is
investment.
That's right.
Team.
Voice.
Yeah.
I am an owner too, in a small way.
Yeah.
That's very empowering.
Yeah.
And that's what great companies do well. And we help facilitate that process.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, and then I want to talk to people out there watching who have already piqued an interest in what you guys are doing. What is the biggest roadblock that you think most companies have? Is it that the age of administration is too like you said, too comfortable, the idea of change, or is it more ego that you're not, hey, we know what we're doing? What roadblock do you guys see the most, or what is the biggest roadblock to really fully implementing what you guys do when you go into a company?
The biggest roadblock is middle management. So in that idea that I gave you, it was the guy in the mailroom and then the CFO, general counsel, et cetera.
It's the guy in the middle of those two.
It's the people in the middle that often block,
right? Because
if I'm running the mail centers in corporate and I'm the manager, I'm worried that the CFO is going to think, right, well, how come I didn't think of that? Right. How come I didn't implement that already? So one of the most important activities we do is to work with the senior executives to convince the middle executives that there really is amnesty.
Right. There has to be this flow from it. It has to be. There can't be
you
a place
can't
where
block
it stops.
it.
Right.
Don't block it.
Right.
Let it come up. And we're going to praise you when you find an $8 million reduction in mailroom expenses and not hold it over your head as, why didn't you do that before? Right. Now, sometimes it's in the, CFO's nature to kind of be like, well, why didn't you do that? Why didn't you do that before? And I remember in one meeting, I sat next to the CFO and he started going after one of the guys who came up with the ideas, saying, how come you didn't do this before? I put my hand on his knee. I said, we're very glad you came up with that because it's material savings and we're grateful for the impact on earnings. And then after the meeting, I said to the CFO, if you do that to that guy, nobody's ever going to give you ideas anymore because they're going to be concerned that their boss is going to be mad at them, right? Or somehow penalize them. So one of the big issues in companies is that middle management layer that is threatened by initiatives showing that maybe they missed something. Well, of course they missed something. Good managers work on the big rocks. Do I have the right org structure? Do I have the right people? Am I keeping my bosses happy? Am I implementing the strategic vision? Am I hitting my budget? That's a full-time activity. What we at Vichy Partners do is we come and help them with the small and the medium-sized rocks, but we find hundreds or thousands of them. And it's not the middle manager's job to find all those. They can't. They don't have the bandwidth. They don't have the time. They don't have the time to brainstorm thousands of ideas and then filter them down to the few hundred that actually work.
So let's talk to companies out there, potential clients who are watching this today and saying, man, I wonder if that's us. We could probably, I would think the two things they think of is how is this going to work? What happens? How's that initial call work? How do we get this started? Can we afford it? Some of those basic questions that, those mid to smaller companies are thinking about. What advice can you give them a little bit about, what this first experience with you guys is like, how you work initially, and why they should contact you guys, go to the website, get that information? What can you say to them?
So go to our website, ViCiPartners.com, and then the way in which we initiate work with clients is we'll have a pretty good idea from our benchmarking of working in comparable companies or companies that have similar issues as to what the savings potential might be or the earnings growth potential might be. And so we'll sit down with the CEO or CFO and say, given everything we know, here's what we think would happen if we worked with you. Is that valuable enough for you? And is that valuable enough for us? Because we're in it together.
Right, skin in the game.
Yeah, and we charge a modest retainer because we want the clients to take us, we want some skin in the game up front, right? But most of our fee is earned when the cash is actually generated. And typically our clients are returning a material return, very fast payback and a rapid growth to their earnings. So our buyers are usually the CEO or the owners of the company if it's a PE firm. And we can figure out pretty quickly whether we can help that business. And if we don't think we can help them, we'll let them know that as well.
Yeah.
So when we say yes, we're in a sense putting ourselves at risk. We're investing a team. There's cost associated with that.
Sure.
We have as I said earlier, very experienced people on our teams who are very expensive. So when we take on a project, we are making a big commitment to our clients.
Yeah.
And we're happy to do so if we think there's sufficient opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, it's been an important conversation, especially what's going on in the world, the business environment of today, like you said.
Right now, Damon, given the macroeconomic environments of increasing debt costs, inflation continuing, or at least probably not dropping too quickly, difficulty accessing equity markets, companies really do need to think about their profitability, because the more profitable they are, the more they can invest in growth. Because the other ways to invest in growth aren't as available as they were a year ago or so. And so right now, it's all about the profitability. And Vici Partners does just that. We help companies become more profitable, either to help them get out of a money-losing situation or to generate additional funds so they can invest in growth. And that's the one thing that we do. And right now, that is a very, very important activity for companies to be pursuing, whether you're the $50 million revenue small company of a PE portfolio or a $50 billion public company.
That's great stuff. It's been a great conversation. We've been speaking with Alec Hudnut, who is the managing partner of Vici Partners. You can find them online, www.vicipartners.com. Alec, thanks for being on Spotlight Television.
Damon, thank you very much. I enjoyed our conversation.
It's been a great one. And I want to thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time right here on Spotlight Television.